Thank you very much for all your support for the museum and the speakers. We do have a great lineup this year, but starting with a fantastic one today. So our presenter today was born in regional Victoria and has a background in education and not-for-profits. He's always been interested in history. In 1999, he was with some friends down on the west coast and stumbled across a monument to the Fiji, an 1891 shipwreck at Moonlight Head near Princetown in West Victoria. Amongst those who lost their lives was a hero of the rescue, a fellow from Geelong. The Fiji was built by the same boat builders who built the Titanic, Harland and Wolff, and it is now my pleasure to introduce Alan McLean, who will highlight the tragedy, bravery and mystery of this shipwreck. And the book, Mystery at Moonlight Head, is available for sale out the front, and it is $25. Thank you and welcome.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Mary Lou's got it all wrong. My name is Lewis Evans. It's the 8th of September 1891. I've just written a letter to my grandfather back in Wales, and I've written it at Princetown. And before I send it off, I'd like to read it to you. I suppose you will have heard of our fated ship Fiji long before this letter will reach you. Most of us were saved, but as it was, 11 were drowned. I'll give you a full description of the wreck. It was on a Sunday morning. We sighted Cape Otway Light at 12:20. We went along until 2:15 when the captain again came on the poop deck. A squall had struck us and we saw the land close to, we calculated about 5.5 miles off, but which in reality was about half a mile from us. The captain's orders were to tack ship, but she would not answer to her helm and she missed stays. Next orders were to wear ship, but when she was a little way around, she struck on a rock. All hands were called and there was a rush for the lifebelts because all of us thought she would go down in a few minutes, but such was not the case. Then some of us fired off blue lights and rockets, while others tried to get the lifeboats out and put everything in them, but the boats smashed. Then the captain suggested we would stop until daybreak, which is in 2.5 hours. On that day, sunrise was about 6:40 a.m. To which we all agreed. But the time seemed never to come, whilst water was washing over us all the time. Day broke at last, and then we all went forward. The first thing to do was get a line ashore. But one of the men volunteered to take one. He took a line and very nearly got ashore, but the line was too heavy, the backwash too strong, and he had to swim back. He was quite exhausted when we got him on board. His name is Julius Jabau. Remember that name, please. Then another man tried, but he was drunk. And the line broke and he was drowned. Then the man who tried first had to try again. He was nearly ashore, but the line was stuck in a rock. Luckily, he had his knife with him. He cut the line, got ashore, but directly he got on land, he sank to his knees and thanked his guardian, and everyone gave a murmur of applause. He was on a track to where he knew not, but he lay down for a little rest, and some men came along and found him. He told them about the wreck, and then it gladdened our eyes and hearts to see people crowding on the shore. But they could not help us. The sea was very rough, and they sent for a rocket apparatus which arrived about 5 o'clock on Sunday evening. It then took a little while to arrange it. All this time we only had a couple of biscuits to eat, and they were soaked in salt water. The first shot with the apparatus went far wide of the mark, but the second shot was a splendid one and just a thin line about as thick as your little finger. They had not all the gear for the apparatus on the beach, so we had to get ashore by the small line. 15 got ashore by it and 11 lost. 5 apprentices saved and 1 lost, and also the 3rd officer lost. There was a big fire waiting for us. When it was my turn to go, I got on very well until about 40 yards from shore. Then I got entangled in some seaweed and I called out, "Save me," and somebody came out and saved me. I could not stand when I got ashore. They took off my shirt, singlet and drawers which I had on and rubbed me down. A gentleman brought some of us down to his house that night. He brought all the rest down the next morning. He's been very kind to us all, and he said I could stop with him if I wished, and I took the kind offer. As it happens, his name is Mr. Evans. So I don't think you'll find me in England again for a good many years. I will write you separate letters soon. Give my best love to my darling little sister and accept the same yourselves. From your ever affectionate Lewis Evans. P.S. If I offered up a prayer that night, I offered up many a one. I'm 16. I probably left school about age 14 and I've gone to sea. I'm not sure this is my first voyage, but pretty close to it. I'm actually impressed with my own ability to write a letter. It's pretty articulate. Right, I better move out of character and see what we can do. That's me in the hat. I spent my life in the Antipodes, mostly in New Zealand. I was with the firefighters in New Zealand, and I died in about 1953. And that is my grandson that I'm holding, and he is still alive, and he and his family are coming over to see the wreck site and the monument shortly. This was a dramatic event in Victoria's news services for the next week. When I say news services, I mean the newspapers. What's happened here is when the German sailor Jabauer was found in the scrub, by some fellows riding out to look to see whether they might select some land, I reckon the last thing you'd imagine would be a near naked German sailor with a knife strapped to his waist. But that's what they found. And they were able to then sight the wreck, and the instructions were sent off. Firstly, a young fellow called Willie Ward was sent to Port Campbell to raise the alarm. Subsequently, other men associated with that investigation of land rode to Camperdown to raise the alarm because the telegraph line between Port Campbell and Warrnambool was down. How they got the information through is extraordinary because this is an extract from the Argus newspaper the following day. We think news is pretty quick now, like instantaneous, but it was very impressive that by telegraph this was through to Melbourne. As Julius Jabauer, as I say, naked, in the scrub, it's fair to say that had those selectors not found him and no one else had seen the wreck, all of the sailors would have perished. It's so isolated, so remote, so few people, and it's a Sunday, people are at church. This was a bonus. Willie Ward gets to Port Campbell. He's wanting to get the men and the rocket apparatus organised. It's about 20 miles, I've got to tell you, in the old money. And the men were at church. That saved him having to ride around from house to house to get the men mobilised. And so Julius Jabauer was first ashore. He was able to be nurtured and massaged and blankets and so on. But as I say again, the rest of the sailors were still on that ship at 5 o'clock on Sunday night. A bark, Fiji was a bark, three-master. That's not actually it, but that gives you an impression. Those of you who had the chance to read the notes that I left on the seats will know it's about a 70-metre long vessel, and it was carrying mixed goods, sewing machines, pianos. Not many of them made in Australia in 1891, so they're all imported from England and Germany. They had lots of toys. They had lots of booze, crates and crates of booze, and lots of toys, I said, for the Christmas period was coming up. Very strangely, there was a photographer on the scene. And so this is taken on the 6th of September with the boat stuck on the reef. If you used your imagination, the jibboom, for the non-sailors, I'll say that's at the front of the ship. There's little dots on that jibboom. The sailors were perched up on there because they weren't sure whether the ship was going to break up and they'd be drowned, or whether the cargo, which included dynamite, might sort them out once and for all. They spent the day on that jibboom. They're waiting for the rocket to come out from Port Campbell. And so this is a practiced procedure to get a line to the shore or from the boat or reverse. Somehow a solid line needed to be connected. This was well versed at Port Campbell from previous circumstances, and so these men, in their Sunday gear, their church gear, have loaded up a wagon, ridden their own horses and got down to the beach. However, the reference in the letter to the very light line was fatal. Not with the light line was a heavier line. The procedure was project the light line to the vessel, make it secure, on the shore tie the heavier line, which could then be hauled aboard the ship, rig up a pulley system, tripod on the beach as you see there, and one at a time the sailors might make their way ashore. There's the practice activity. On the right you can just see it's like a bucket with two holes in the bottom. It's called a breeches buoy. And if the system had worked perfectly, one at a time, on the line, in the bucket, pulled direct to the shore. As I say, without the heavy line, they were left with the light line, which I've subsequently learned was no thicker than your standard clothesline. How did the vessel get there? What's going on? There's a bit of a mystery. Of course, why was it in so close to the shore? That's part of the mystery at Moonlight Head. The only light at that time to guide the sailors through Bass Strait was the Cape Otway light, which, interestingly to me, is no longer shining. It's not needed. The vessels have sophisticated navigation equipment, but in 1891, on a windy, squally, showery night, the light for the Cape Otway light was the primary guide. And as you heard Lewis explain in his letter, they got it wrong. Lewis Evans he referred to Mr. Evans looking after him, and that is John Evans. John Evans was the owner of a guest house called Rivernook down near Princetown. The wealthy of Geelong, Melbourne and Ballarat would make their way to the nearest train, might be Camperdown, might be Cobden, that area. And John Evans would meet them in his buggy and take them to about a 20-room guest house called Rivernook on the Gellibrand River near Princetown. Quite an upper-class place, but there were no other lower-class places either. We were in a fairly remote area, and people would go there for a 10-day, 14-day holiday, fishing primarily on the beach there at Princetown. John Evans, quite the character. And equally a character, his wife Emily. And they, of course, opened their guest house up to the stricken sailors once they'd been brought ashore, once they'd been nurtured, once they'd been massaged. We're talking about serious exposure, sitting out on that jaboom for 12 hours. And they were plied with the standard medical treatment of the day, brandy. At this stage, brandy brought from Rivernook down to the beach, not to be confused with the brandy that I'll make mention of a little later as far as material being washed ashore. They played host to the survivors. Julius Jabow's the man in the middle in the waistcoat with the white sleeves. These survivors were fitted out with whatever clothing could be found. And for the first couple of days, not much male clothing could be found. They spent time in the petticoats of the women who worked at the guest house, the women who made up the rooms and so forth. They are the women who were attending to the men's needs, looking for clothing, looking for blankets, and trying to bring them round from what obviously was a huge, shocking experience. The ship broke up about an hour after the last man got ashore. They scrambled ashore, as Lewis has explained. Some of them were washed off the line. Can you imagine a light line, a couple of 100 metres long to the shore, 4 or 5 sailors bobbing up and down on the line at once? Ducked into the water, dipped into the water, kelp, seaweed, undertow, dragging them back. I'm surprised that as few as 11 died. The ship broke up, as I said, about half an hour after the skipper got ashore, and the rubble, the wreckage, the timber from off the ship, the canvas from the sails, the toys, Right at the very bottom there, you can see a collection of round objects. They are India rubber balls that were part of the cargo and floated ashore. John and Eberly Evans subsequently built a little beach shack, camping shack, right down at the base of the cliff. The wreck itself, the shipping company clearly wanted to try and salvage what they could, and they placed notices inviting tenders to come and salvage what they could from the wreck. It was not a success for a number of reasons. The sea was too rough. You could not do any salvaging work from the shore. It would have had to have been done from the sea, and it was just too rough for any of the vessels that attempted to do so. The most prominent, I suppose, of the many men who waded out into the water to rescue these fellows, this is a time, of course, when very few people could swim, wading out into that water with the undertow, near darkness. One of them was a fellow called Bill Robe. That's Bill on his wedding day. Bill had the notoriety arising from the fact that he dragged ashore the skipper, Captain William Vickers. And he was the same treatment, massage, brandy, fires, keep him warm. The only thing the skipper was wearing, apart from a singlet, was his most prized possession, which was tied around his waist. It was a fob watch that his grandmother had given him when he went to sea. In gratitude to Bill Robe for rescuing him, Captain Vickers presented Bill Robe with that fob watch. We still have it. Those of you who know the Flagstaff Hill Maritime Museum in Warrnambool can go there, ask about the watch from the Fiji wreck, and that is the watch. Last time it was wound up, it was still working. Now that might have been 30 years ago, but a dip in the Bass Strait clearly didn't have an immediate impact, at least on that watch. The hull lies in the position where it wrecked. It's a steel hull. It's obviously rusted, covered in sand from time to time. Divers have been down there. Before the Shipwreck Protection Act of 1975, it was a self-serve arrangement. People could pinch stuff off the wreck, and they did. Some of those doing the pinching found this bell. It says Fiji and Liverpool, which was its home port. And they applied a little bit of explosive, and the bell was broken. A fellow I've got to know pretty well now, mate, he has subsequently dived on the wreck, found those pieces, glued them back together again. That bell is in the visitors' centre at Port Campbell in a nice display case. Captain Vickers, the mystery at Moonlight Head. Why was he in so close? There was various speculation, mostly by him, claiming an uncharted current, something that hadn't been mapped, causing him to be in too close to the shore. Big question mark. Speculation, an iron hull. A number of skippers were said to have said that in approaching the Victorian coast, which had ironstone and various other metallic elements in it, they felt the impact of some magnetic field. Captain Vickers said he felt that the boat had been pulled in close to the shore. 2 question marks over that, I would have thought. However, Marine Board of Inquiry took evidence from the sailors, took evidence from Captain Vickers, and he was found guilty of negligence, and the standard punishment at those times was 12 months off. No licence for 12 months. What you have there, which you can't read, but take my word for it, he's writing in Liverpool almost 12 months to the day later, and that's his application to have his licence renewed. We found that, a mate of mine found that in the marine history records in England. His application to be refitted as a master of the ship, or to be qualified. He did go ahead and sail. Unfortunately, a second journey didn't end in fatalities, but the ship he was on was fatal, and I think his sailing career came to a grinding halt. The sailors who were rescued at the time, a few days at Rivernook, some of them had a couple of days in Warrnambool where some fundraising activity went on to refit them with clothing and so on. They were then taken back up to Melbourne and they were paid off by the ship's agent. To their credit, they got together and put in £1 each and bought this clock and sent it to John and Emily Evans at Rivernook, and the inscription on it says, presented to John and Emily Evans in appreciation of the kindness shown after the wreck of the Fiji on the 7th of September 1891. Wrong, the engraver got it wrong. Or the person telling the engraver got it wrong, it was on the 6th. Interesting sub-story about the clock. I wandered into the Royal Historical Society of Victoria about 5 years ago, went into the Executive Director's office and there was a clock on the mantelpiece. And I said to her, oh, that's an interesting clock, where does that come from? She said, oh, we don't know. I got to work with some brasso on that plate, and as soon as I saw it, I knew what it was. And so this was the actual clock. How it got into the hands of the Royal Historical Society, no one seems to know, but that clock is still there, given to John and Emily Evans by these grateful sailors. The Warrnambool Standard reported on the disaster on the Monday. On the Tuesday, there's a notice in the paper calling people together to prepare for a concert on the Friday. On the Wednesday, there's a notice, rehearsal tonight for Friday's concert. They held a concert on the Friday to raise funds for these bereft sailors. And the intention was to also, give money to the widows. Of course, they were not to know that most of these sailors were single, but nevertheless, funds were raised. Some were sent back to the widows, and it was decided to erect a monument to those who lost their lives up on the cliff top, right on a strategic spot. That strategic spot was where 7 bodies were buried. A medical advisor from Cobden came down to supervise the bodies. He had to sign off for those bodies. For reasons that I don't understand, there was a 2 or 3 day delay, and the medical officer decided they had to be buried on site rather than taken to the Lockard Cemetery, which is about 25 miles away. They were placed in makeshift coffins, timber washed on the beach, hauled up the cliff and buried on this spot. Simple ceremony, simple grave. The ceremony only really attended by the sailors who survived. That monument was lost for about 30 or 40 years. The coastal scrub there has grown, it's very, very thick, and a good mate of mine, his father said, you fellas ought to go and see if you can find that monument lost in the scrub. And in 1999, Brian, my mate, Margaret, who's here, my wife now, we scrambled up the cliff face in the scrub, not knowing where we were, where we were close or where we were. You couldn't even see each other if you were scrambling around in the scrub 5 or 10 metres away. We had to keep talking to each other to know where we were. And Brian then called out, I've got it. I should say about Arthur Wilkinson. The 11 victims are named on one side of the monument, and it also refers to sacred to the memory of the young colonist Arthur Wilkinson. Arthur was part of the selection group riding out. He saw a fellow trying to swim ashore. He swam out to try to help him, and the 2 of them could not make it. They were washed back by the undertow, and they were hauled back on board ship. The hauling up, or the immersing in the sea, or some other incident caused him to be unconscious, and Arthur Wilkinson died, as far as I'm concerned, on the vessel. Those of you who get to read the book will see there was some controversy about whether he was dead when the captain left the ship. Arthur was only about 20 years of age, single man. He'd only been down there a few weeks. He's not buried at that site. He's buried in the Herne Hill Cemetery in Geelong. Not the main one that we pass going into Geelong, but over at Herne Hill. Arthur Wilkinson was a hero in every respect. People wrote poems to the newspapers about him, lots of tributes to his brave effort. Royal Humane Society wrote a letter to his mother. He was really, his work was highlighted. People in Geelong decided to raise some funds to erect a monument to him. It caused a hell of a fight. They wanted to put the monument in Market Square, or what Market Square was back then. All sorts of dispute, money being raised, concerts and entertainment and so on. The money was banked. The bank folded. Not for the first time a financial institution in Geelong that went the wrong direction. Or maybe it was the first time. But there is no monument in Geelong to Arthur Wilkinson, and there should be. His tombstone refers to him having drowned at the Fiji site in the 6th of September 1891. But goodness, when you get to the Herne Hill Cemetery and you find where he's buried under a pencil pine, that's no tribute. There should be more recognition given. In about 1970, some skin divers from Warrnambool, calling themselves the Warrnambool Skin Divers Association, they were aware of a couple of the anchors of the vessel. This is a small kedging anchor, as it's called, being on the shoreline, and they fitted in a crevice in the rock right at the base of the cliff. The hull is about 200 metres to the right, and the monument is about 200 metres to the left, up the top of the cliff. And that's been sited there since about 1970. And you used to be able to read the concrete base that said the names of a couple of the Warrnambool Skin Divers Association men and the date they erected it. But pleasingly, it's still there, and if you see any tourist promotion posters of that area, very often there's a photo of the anchor on the beach. When I say up the cliff, I mean up the cliff. To haul those bodies up the top for burial, and to haul other stuff. By other stuff I mean some of the contents of the vessel being washed ashore. Now you wouldn't imagine, if there's dozens and timber crates full of booze, you wouldn't imagine anybody'd want to go down to the beach to see what they could find, would you? You wouldn't think so. Lots of stories about that. Controversial stuff. The Melbourne press were saying people were going down, stepping over the bodies and not attending to the needs of the survivors to help themselves to the booze. Made the local people very angry, naturally enough, because every effort had been applied to saving these fellows. Sure, the bodies might still have been on the beach, but they were the bodies, they were not the survivors. Interesting component. There's a chapter in the book that deals with that. It is a rugged piece of coastline. You can make your way there. You can go down 365 steps to the beach. But those of you who wish to do it, I remind you that on the way up there are still 365 steps. We've been down there many times. It's best to go at low tide. Some ratbag went on high tide that day. He scurried along the base of the cliff. A wave was coming in. He'd grab hold and he'd wait till the wave receded. He'd get round. He wanted a good photo for the front of his book. There's the steps. Even if you go down 100 steps, you can get a sense of where we are. That tiny photo I showed you earlier, the black and white one of the stricken ship on the reef, that's exactly from that spot. So out near that big breaker was where the vessel was stranded on the rocks. There's been some developments. In the book, I'm critical of Parks Victoria for their failure to recognise that a little track cut through the scrub off the Great Ocean Walk could be an added experience benefit for anyone on the walk. Pleasingly, I've met a fellow in Parks Victoria who agreed with me. In the last couple of years, a track has been cut, about 800 metres from the Devil's Kitchen campsite on the Great Ocean Walk. I was not best pleased that they chose to put a high picket fence rather than a replica fence that you saw in the earlier black and white photo. However, that they are concerned about vandalism, and so a larger picket fence has been built. It's only been built in the last 12 months, but you get the sense of how quickly the vegetation takes over there, the density of the scrub. You can see it behind the picket fence, and take my word for it, take Margaret's word for it, it was dense scrub. In the event that that area was not disturbed for a period, it would be no time at all before the vegetation was back. And we were there about 3 weeks ago with my mate, the park ranger of down in that area, and he gave me the okay to get my secateurs out. It looks as though I've lost my legs. It's not quite that dense, the vegetation. I'm kneeling on the grass, and pruning up the vegetation there so that people can see the monument. The other good news, I think terrific news, about December 2022, I nominated the monument for heritage listing in Victoria. These things take a long time normally, and I was expecting it might take quite a long time and it might even be rejected. However, the executive director of the organisation to which I submitted it to said, no, not doing it. And he's nominated the monument, the anchor and the hull. And it's just been announced in the past few weeks, if you go onto the Heritage Victoria website, it's that precinct, that seascape, that area of what happened in 6th of September 1891 has now been registered on the Victorian Heritage Register. So a happy outcome, access to those who want to walk in, and obviously lifetime protection for that precinct now. There won't be overgrown monument again. Now these sessions generally work best, David, when I draw breath, in fact, and I invite questions and comments, anything at all about what I've said. I have to tell you, I've probably only told you about a third of the story. It's a long story, it's a complicated story. I hope I've picked out the bits and pieces that are of most interest, but there's much more to be said. Question?
Alan, why do you know is that area called Moonlight Head?
The steep point was identified by Matthew Flinders as part of his journey around this part of the world. And don't ask me the year because I should know, but I've forgotten. But it was named by Flinders, and they weren't that creative at that time. Clearly he saw the promontory one night in the moonlight. So there's no mystery about why it was called Moonlight Head, but as I hope I've told you, there's a few mysteries. How did the vessel get in so close? How did people get the story so wrong about the booze being the main reason why people went down to the beach? Why was the big rope not included? Speculation there that John Evans, when he met the buggy coming out from Port Campbell, had to get to the Gellibrand River, had to be unloaded into a boat, had to be rowed upstream to where Evans had his buggy, and the suggestion was that perhaps the photographer who got there might have offered a little consideration to be included, and perhaps the heavy rope was not taken when it should have been. Not proven, speculation, part of the mystery. Other questions, queries?
Yeah, I've been on the Fiji numerous times.
That's what you want in an audience, a diver from the Fiji to either hopefully verify what I've said or maybe argue with me.
There's a paragraph in Margaret Mackenzie's book that stated that the ship was carrying a consignment of gold. Don't know whether you've read that.
I've got the manifest.
Yeah, I've got the manifest.
They may have.
Not on the manifest.
They may not have put it on the manifest. I don't think I would have put it on the manifest to tell Mr. Pirate that there was gold on board. Could be. I've seen Mackenzie's book, Mrs. Mackenzie's book, and I don't argue with it.
I was with Ronnie one day and I found the gold.
When I do these talks again, can you come with me, please? I want to be able to hold up this bloke. Not only has he dived on the wreck, he's found gold.
So it did exist. It was in the form in jewellery.
Gold jewellery. Yeah. And do you souvenir any? Did you souvenir any before 1975?
I had gold, yeah.
Wow, I'm going to get to know this bloke. Very good.
It's Heritage Victoria are aware of it.
Okay.
So it should be on their list.
That's interesting because in Heritage Week, it comes up in April, I've been asked to do this basic presentation to an audience at the Mission to Seafarers in Melbourne, in Flinders Street, and they prepared the material and they said, and we'll have some exhibits from the wreck. And I got in touch with them. I said, I haven't got anything, there's no exhibits I've got. And they said, oh no, we've got some exhibits. Just maybe.
It's an interesting site. I've been there. It's in 30 odd feet of water, and I've been down there when it's it's gone from 30 feet to about a metre. And
It's the movement of sand, isn't it?
Completely disappears.
Yeah.
You know, you spend an hour and a half going down there, and it's 2 metres deep instead of, it's completely disappears. It's the only dive site where I've actually, because of the seas down there, where I've actually stood up and walked out of the boat because of the sea.
Oh, okay.
I've actually got out of the boat because I thought, so I would stay in the boat and have the boat go over.
Or lose your lunch.
Yeah, or lose my life.
Yeah, it's rugged.
That's serious society.
Yeah. I wouldn't want to be in that water. Wouldn't want to be 1 foot into the water. These blokes who waded out, stripped off, waded out, grabbed these fellas and resuscitated them. You know, fantastic stuff. Interestingly, the bodies that were washed up, and 4 of them were never found, but the bodies that were washed up were mostly fully clad. Victorian era, bit shy of taking the gear off. The blokes who survived were the blokes who stripped off and made their way along the line. Sorry, lady here.
I was just going to ask, why was it carrying explosives?
Well, explosives were needed for a whole host of things, including mining, and mining still uses explosives. And I believe that there was consignment was on order from Australia for this stuff. Nitroglycerin, I think, might have been part of it. But the crew would have known what was on board, and the crew weren't taking any chances. Fancy sitting out on that boom from daybreak till 5 p.m. and then deciding that night time's coming, got to make a run for it. Just in relation to the book, happy to sign them. The Mystery at Moonlight Head book, as I said, $20. If you want it signed by the author, that changes the equation a bit. It'd be $19.95. This gentleman's books.
Lewis Evans, was it?
Yes, my name's Lewis Evans, 16-year-old apprentice, just come to see.
What a great letter. What a great letter writer you are. And, what a great historian. What a great tale. Thank you very much.